Welcome to Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. This is a two-part series featuring interviews aimed at amplifying the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion in the classroom and in higher education. It is meant to be practical, to help everyday teachers like us identify and engage in steps toward inclusive pedagogical practices and systemic changes. No matter where you are in your understanding of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we think you will find these conversations helpful and enlightening. And now, please enjoy EDI Ask Psych Sessions with Marianne Lloyd.
Thanks for joining us. Today I am talking with Rihanna Mason from Georgia State University. Thanks for joining us, Rihanna.
Thanks for having me today.
So can you just tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your training, your teaching, research experience, things that might be helpful before we kind of jump into talking about issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Sure. Well, I'm a proud alumna of Spelman College. It's a single-gendered, historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. At Spelman, I obtained my bachelor's degree in psychology, and it was at Spelman that I was inducted into Psych-High. I received both my master's and PhD in experimental psychology from the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Different time and space and different from the culture at Spelman, but I learned what it meant to be a Gamecock. And it was during the time that I was also exposed to football culture. So now I know what it means to be in the SEC. My dissertation research was an eye movement monitoring study focusing on how we learn the meaning of unfamiliar words through reading. Using eye movement monitoring as a tool helped me appreciate working with big data sets and the importance of thinking through how we tag or code variables of interest. When I graduated from the University of South Carolina, I went on to become a postdoctoral fellow at the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State University. I was able to work with an interdisciplinary research team. I had very important experiences assessing oral language skill of children. And these children were enrolled in urban schools in Tallahassee. From there, I took my first stab at a tenure track position at Georgia State University, joined the cognitive and developmental programs there. I then went on to join faculty at Emmanuel College in Franklin Springs, Georgia. I was part of a dynamic duo of just two full-time faculty. I was able to teach all things experimental and applied psychology, and my colleague, Blake Rackley, who's still there, taught all things related to clinical and counseling psychology. I'm now a research scientist at the Urban Child Study Center at Georgia State, so I'm back at GSU. I'm now in the College of Education and Human Development. We've rebranded the College of Education a couple of times. I work at the Urban Child Study Center, and we work with a number of stakeholders on research practice partnerships that are either statewide or within Metro Atlanta. And now, most recently, I am sharing some of my effort working in the Provost's office, cataloging diversity initiatives campus-wide.
Great. So I'm going to just guess that this sort of collectively means that we could probably talk for a few hours about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I will try to respect that Ask Psych Sessions is supposed to be the shorter form podcast. Why don't we just really jump right in? What inspired this series initially, I think, we're hearing from guests on a variety of topics, but one of the things I wanted to talk to people about is, how do you have these dialogues, especially in a classroom, around race and racism when maybe, I'll just flat out ask you, right? We both have experimental psychology training. I can tell you, I did not get any training in this. Was this part of your formal training as opposed to your, actual life training?
No, it was not formal training at all. And in fact, through trial and error, you just really have to learn how to give yourself grace and give others grace. I think I've made a number of mistakes in the sense that I've tried to make teachable moments out of things. And I've had to realize that there are limits. There are limits to my experiences. I've seen some of the world, but I haven't seen it all. And so I can draw similarities when I'm talking to others. I can actively listen. I can be humble and I can have compassion, but I may not be able to truly have empathy, with all. One example that comes to mind is when I was teaching human growth and development. Each student was responsible for caring for an egg baby. And one young woman had her egg baby sitting on the edge of her desk. The egg baby fell off the desk by mistake. And I jumped to make it a teachable moment about child safety. Little did I know the student had experienced a miscarriage. And I was not prepared to provide grief counseling, nor was I prepared to tell her that I knew what she was going through. And I think this happens a lot when we're trying to have these discussions about race and marginalized communities. We are limited by what we've gone through and what we've seen. And we just have to be open-minded to know that, there's a side of things we have not seen. And if we don't listen, we won't know.
And that I would, guess is particularly relevant for white faculty like myself, right? That, I can read all the books in the world and try to be better educated, but my ability to understand what it's like to be a Black person in this country is going to be, incomplete.
That's correct. Yeah. And I think it's not only, white faculty, but, think about, we have gendered conversations these days, and we have individuals that, we think about gender inequity and equal pay and, that sort of thing. But, my experience as a Black female within our discipline, I don't know what it's like to be a Black male in our discipline. And I'm sure, those experiences are just as important as well. We really have a minority, I believe, or a pipeline problem bringing Black males into our discipline right now. And so who would have thought that would have been an issue for psychology?
Yeah, especially, I think all of the subfields probably, but I think particularly in experimental, right? Like this is where I will not just name the few that I could name. That would not be appropriate. But yes, it's so wow. So this is so you're right. So this is really also two-pronged. So when we're going to have these dialogues, I guess, right, I've been thinking about the classroom piece, but there's also, being a faculty member piece of things. So I guess I'll sort of, do you sort of find that those, there's obviously power dynamics in both situations, but yeah, maybe do you just want to kind of talk about the dialoguing in the classroom and or in faculty meetings, or, the work that you're doing maybe in the provost office?
Right. So I'll talk a little bit about the work we do at the Urban Child Study Center, because I think that's where the power dynamic comes up, not only because I am working for a male counterpart. So I have, the supervisor, subordinate dynamic going on, but then also we mentor graduate students. And so we have that hierarchy between PhD students, master's students, and undergraduate students. We found that having cultural competency workshops at the center kind of helps us be, more transparent and allows us to confront our own biases. At least as a starting point for that as we approach our work out in the community, but also working together. So we've talked about what it means to have experienced a microaggression, and to hear some individuals talk about, their concepts of what a microaggression is versus others that have truly experienced them. So the difference between, I've been maybe called something that I didn't like, versus it being racially motivated or an ageist statement. I know I have a hard time sometimes when individuals approach me on campus and they still think I'm a student. And so there's an issue then with, also, delegating, the power I may have above a student if I'm not seen, as in that supervisory role, or getting things done on campus. And you mentioned, working in the provost's office, and now faculty to do some hard work, but I may still be seen as, the student. So we have also had some other cultural competency workshops about what it means to incorporate racial and ethnic equity into our research. So we work in a lot of urban settings and with communities that are disadvantaged, but how we speak with a promotive lens instead of not always taking a deficit, mindset. So I think that example is also just global in anyone that we're communicating with. We may have differences, but those differences don't always speak to deficits or things that should be negatively construed.
Thank you. That's you. Unsurprisingly, aren't the first person to sort of talk about this deficit approach. Although I'll admit that it was definitely something fairly new to me, and that I want to be kind of conscientious about in my courses. That I'm not promoting a deficit model when I want to address issues around race and racism in the classroom or in general, or advising. So the other way that it turns out that I knew you after someone suggested you for the podcast is through SEPA. And do you want to talk a little bit about the work, which is the Southeastern Psychological Association, right?
Sure. So I was first introduced to SEPA as an undergraduate, but I have served now for several years as the chair of the Committee for Equality and Professional Opportunity, which is CEPO, not to be confused with SEPA. So we're a subcommittee of the Southeastern Psychological Association, and our subcommittee organizes programming during the meeting that's related to diverse and marginalized groups. And so that's a lot of different things. In one of our meetings in Charleston, we actually sponsored a difficult dialogue session. It was led by Dr. Linda Jones, who's the chair of psychology at Belmont University, and Ecclesia Holmes, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Georgia. But it was really an effort to get different members of the SEPA community in the same room to unpack the reasons why it's difficult to communicate with others about topics like racism and sexism and discrimination. But to even talk about things that people may have experienced at a SEPA meeting. It was wall to wall, which was great. We didn't have all of the individuals that we thought needed to be in that room to kind of hear the dialogue, hear the thoughts of those who had been, on the other side of maybe negative statements. But it was a good, healthy dialogue to help us remember why we feel uncomfortable having these difficult dialogues. I want to give Dr. Jones credit for kind of taking examples, her takeaways mapped on the difficult dialogues topic into the subdisciplines of psychology. I can't remember her exact notes, but I'm going to try to take a stab of two that are relevant to our field. So when we're trying to make quick decisions and we're in these conversations, we default to heuristics. And so these heuristics are mental shortcuts based upon the available information in our memory. And that's why it's important to get out and be among people who don't look and sound and behave like you, to get a more global experience, to be able to, embrace others. One of the things I learned at Spelman from one of our courses is really to have a global perspective. The world doesn't stop with the United States. There's issues that we share with people in other countries, other cultures. And then the other thing is that there's the contact hypothesis, right? That says that we can reduce conflict between individuals if we get those groups together. So it was kind of twofold when we had that dialogue there at SEPA. The other part is that we kind of stray away from having these difficult dialogues because it makes us feel uncomfortable. So we get this physiological response. We know that's, from our fight or flight responses. So we have these reactions to stimuli that we perceive as a threat. We get hyperstimulated. If we think someone's an enemy or a predator, it's like the feeling I get when I'm around dogs. I was chased by a dog in my childhood. And so I get goosebumps, hair stand up, and so other people feel like that when they see a Black male running or walking down their street, as we had here in Georgia, or a Black male wearing a hoodie, or it may be someone that has pink or purple hair. We don't know what that is, but we, experience these different physiological responses because of our upbringing or our past experiences in the world. So that's one thing that we've done through SIPO.
In terms of then your work in the provost office, is this kind of one of the spaces where you're trying to work? I mean, maybe can you just talk a bit about kind of institutional culture? I guess I would say that's something that we're certainly talking about more at Seton Hall, that we need to be, conscientious of the sense of belonging we're creating for students and for faculty, and that those, just because someone is Black or is white, there's not necessarily, I'm not going to suggest one answer, but that we need to be sensitive to that. Is that something that you get to work on?
Sure. I think tangentially, at least at the moment, I may be called to do a little bit more later, but the work that I'm doing right now is cataloging our diversity initiatives. So it's somewhat like diversity audit, although, words carry meaning. They carry emotional valence. So maybe instead of saying audit, I should say asset. So we're basically looking to find what are all the wonderful things that we're doing already on campus that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes we find ourselves operating in silos because we don't know what's happening in another college. One college may be having a lecture series about a particular topic, and then we duplicate the same thing in another college, or, we don't bring the whole community campus wide together to address issues from an interdisciplinary perspective. So we're putting together a database that will house all of these initiatives for 3 priorities, ones that are academically related, multicultural programming, and then policies that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we think that that's a starting point to bring awareness. It's also a starting point to have deeper conversations. It is a starting point to perhaps change the climate. If we see that we're missing, paying attention to certain groups or certain issues, here's a chance that we can make the climate better.
That, and just in terms of like context, Georgia State, I'm going to guess you're a fairly large and also diverse, as I might expect for a state university in Georgia, right? I think my stereotypes of Georgia is that, it's a fairly racially diverse state, and therefore your student body probably as well. But then I'm going to guess that much like other spaces of academia, less so, the faculty may not be as a mirror of the student body.
That's true. Our student body is very diverse. In fact, we've been able to take on the description of being a minority serving institution because of that. But you are right. We still have some work to do to make sure that faculty and administration reflects the same diversity.
And so then maybe just as we kind of wrap things up, what are you seeing through this asset instead of audit, some spaces maybe where things are going well that our listeners might want to bring on, or maybe even like, maybe, it seems a common thing in classrooms for blank to happen, and that, that doesn't really set the kind of tone you want?
Well, I don't think we're yet at the point where we can, or I can make those recommendations. This cataloging initiative just started in the month of June. So we're still collecting information from everyone. And as you know, the summertime is maybe two-pronged. We're on vacation, we're doing other things. So it's a little bit of a challenge right now to get everyone to compile all the wonderful things they're doing over the summer. So we've received almost right at 100 entries into the database, but we still don't have some of the colleges represented or some of the units or departments on campus. We're really trying to get a complete perspective. And so maybe even spaces like athletics or the Rialto Center, are not yet represented, but we want them to be represented because they touch, the entire community. So I'm hoping that we can get to the point where we can say, this is what we're doing at Georgia State. This is what is working. And this is where we still have room to grow.
Well, that, I think that room to grow, right? That's part of what I like about being in academia, is that I don't think I'm ever going to run out of spaces to grow. So maybe we'll have you back for a follow-up, and you can let us know what you've uncovered. And, possibly some of our listeners might also want to encourage their institutions, like you said, to know what else is going on. I guarantee you, I don't know what's going on all over my campus. And I'm, fairly someone that's invested and interested in knowing such things. So I bet that there's some gems to uncover.
Definitely. And definitely would be excited to come back and share. Our initiative really arose out of a book project that I'm doing with Dr. Curtis Bird, who's the special advisor to the provost at GSU. And so we wanted others to be aware, not just of campus initiatives, but of academic pipeline programs. So from K through 12, all the way up to faculty, what are these programs that really help support you moving through the levels of the academy? And so we use that same approach and tool from the book, which was awesome for our campus. So definitely hoping that other campuses can follow suit and also, be informed. I think having collective dialogue like you're doing through the podcast can really help us to achieve more together.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, right? We can know more and then do better together. So thank you so much for your time, Rihanna.